So what is it like? I have so many questions for you, but what is it like it's a school night and you have a packed theater to see a movie that you made 30 years ago?
It's pretty nice. I just have to say a couple of shout outs. Our wonderful editor and my best friend is here, Bill Kerr. Bill, please stand up. There he is waving. Come on, there he is. This was Bill's first movie, and we started out in local TV together, and he went on to edit, a couple little movies, Bridesmaids, Superbad, Trainwreck, among others. So glad he's here. I want to have one other shout out. Do you remember who the little flower girl was in the wedding?
Yeah.
The little girl. That's my daughter. Taylor, please stand up. Stand up, Taylor. There she is. Taylor has been working for Lorne Michaels for the past 9 years, so she's doing okay.
I've never heard of Lorne Michaels. Who's he?
No idea.
Yeah. Okay, let me go backwards. What do you think, these are some questions before we get into Tommy Boy. What do you think would surprise people to learn about being a director in Hollywood?
It's not easy.
Okay.
I'm gonna leave it right there. That's a very loaded question.
You don't have to go further. It's up to you.
No, look, it's like any job. There are good times and there are not good times, but this is incredibly rare. To be able to sit here, not having it be a test screening where you're sweating bullets, but you kind of know by 30 years after it's come out, I think we're okay, right? So this is a great night, but it's up and down.
You directed Anger Management with Sandler and Jack Nicholson. That was one of Jack's last roles. What was that actually like for you, working with like a juggernaut like that?
Well, Jack had a young kid who right now is a young man, and he's doing quite well as an actor. But he was a Sandler fan, and so I think he encouraged Jack to kind of find a new audience, a younger audience. And so he wanted to play in a different sandbox, and it was really interesting because I could tell that Jack was very nervous to work with Adam, and Adam and I were incredibly nervous to work with Jack, so it kind of made a nice balance.
What surprised you about working with him in terms of, did he always want direction? Was he one of these people that could get it on the first take? Did he want like 8 takes? Like, what is he like, or what was he like to work with?
Well, first of all, Jack is the kind of guy that when he walks into the room, all of the oxygen is sucked out of the room, that you could hear a pin drop. But I do remember one time we were shooting right after 9/11 in downtown New York, and Sandler said to me, he said at lunch, Jack's really pissed at you. What did you fucking do? And I said, oh my God, what did I do? He goes, I don't know, man. He said something to me like, I'm the world's greatest actor. You think Pete would like to know where I'd like to walk? In blocking. So, I said, okay, geez, I will let him, find his way on the set, And so the next day, or a few days later, we were filming on an apartment set that, I had designed this whole set. We went to his house, me and David Dorfman, the writer, and he said, I want to break into, because if you've seen Anger Management, he's his anger management therapist, and he has to really, analyze Adam's character's life. So I said, I want to come in like a whirling dervish. I want to go through the kitchen, see what he's eating in the fridge. I want to go into the living room and see what music he's listening to. Then I want to go into the bathroom and look at his medicine cabinet and see what pills he's taking. And then I'll come back. And so I designed the set where we could pretty much do a 360 and everything. And then after what Adam told me, I said, okay, I'm just going to let him do whatever he wants. So we had a rehearsal, clear the set. And there's a long hallway to this door. It's an apartment in New York. And he comes in, and it's 4.5 pages. He stands right in front of that door and rocks back and forth for 4.5 pages, leaving the entire set empty. And I'm looking at Adam, and he says, don't worry, we'll fix it in post, don't worry. And I said, no, I took notes. Anyway, so I gently suggested to Jack, I'm just thinking maybe you might want to explore the kitchen and then, look through the fridge and maybe explore the living room and look through his music. And we're basically repeating what he told me. And he ended up doing it. But it happened to be his 65th birthday, and he was not in a good mood. And I saw he was in his chair, pissed. And so I went up to him and I said, Jack, what's the matter? He said, Keed, you really steam my clams. I said, what? What did I do? He said, you're pushing me all over the place. I said, and I got my script with all the notes that I wrote on the back at his house. I said, Jack, I'm just doing it. These are your notes. Exactly what you said. Go to here, go to here, go to here, all the way back again. This is what you said. And he looked at it and he goes, you're right, I did say that. Okay.
That's great. You directed The Naked Gun 33 1/3. What do you remember about filming that and working with Leslie?
I mean, that was a dream come true. David Zucker gave me my first break, and it was fantastic. The ironic thing about the end of Naked Gun and the beginning of Tommy Boy is I had always wanted to work. I'd worked with Chris twice before Tommy Boy, an HBO special and then an episode of The Jackie Thomas Show, which was a sitcom on ABC. And so I took the first thing that was offered to me, which was this movie with him in it. And we started 6 weeks after Naked Gun. And at the premiere, so I'm in the pre-production office for Tommy Boy, and my assistant at the time had the TV on the news, and he said, Pete, isn't that OJ getting arrested by a tree? And I looked up and I'm like, that's a mistake. They'll figure that out. And this was 6 weeks after the premiere, and at the premiere, I sat next to Nicole. True story.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm just going to move on.
Yeah.
There's nothing. So Get Smart made like 230 million worldwide, and I'm curious, did anyone ever talk about doing a sequel to that one? Or because it seemed, and I could be wrong, but I read that the budget was like 80-ish. So 230 is like a multiplier of 3. It's there where people could be talking about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Regime changes at studios happen, and the head of the studio had left. He was let go, and this was his baby. And so Alan Horn, who I adore, and he was the big champion of the movie once he left and eventually wound up at Disney and really, did an amazing job over there. That was it. No one really wanted to pick up his child and tend to it, so it just went away.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to talk to Alan Horn before, and that guy just knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he's great. Love him.
50 First Dates, another one of your films.
Thank you.
So that one got okay reviews. I'll just say okay, but it is
pretty much my whole career is okay.
It got okay reviews, but it's one of those films that people, like, pardon my language, they fucking love it, and it's one of those that stood the test of time. Like, talk a little bit about making that. At what point, and at what point did you realize, oh, wait a minute, people really liked this movie?
You don't really know how people feel about a movie, I think, until a few years after it comes out. I mean, you'll get, the immediate response. Oh, congrats. Hey, that's great. It was #1 or whatever. But you don't really know until, well, here's a good example tonight. Obviously this movie has stuck, and it started, I would bump into marriage counselors just in conversation at a party or whatever. And about 3 different times, marriage counselors said, we use your movie as a tool for counseling couples, and telling them how you have to work at it every day. That every day, you have to be like Henry Roth and start over again, or at least say I love you and make an attempt, make an effort. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so more and more like that, I started to hear things like that. And as far as rom-coms go, I just saw Adam was on the Drew Barrymore show, and they were talking about it. And that and Tommy Boy are, 2 of the ones that really sort of have stuck.
Jumping into Tommy Boy. So it has been 30 years. When you were making it and when it was coming out, what was like the goal in terms of the studio? What were they hoping for? Were they hoping for like it to do okay? What was their expectations versus the reality?
Well, I think what I heard from Spade was that Lauren looked at him and Farley goofing around in the writer room, at SNL, and said, "You two need to do a movie." And so he assigned the head writers, Terry and Bonnie Turner, who did the first draft, and they gave it to me. And look, I think it was just a programmer. I mean, Sherry would sometimes see a poster and say, "It's on the schedule, spring." It's like, well, there's no script yet. It's like, I don't care. She was, very intuitive.
We should say Sherry Lansing.
Sherry Lansing, the head of Paramount Pictures. Yeah. So I just thought they thought it was a programmer. I think the budget, for the music was non-existent. They thought it was going to be like a garage band, and then we started scoring it with orchestral stuff, and, it sort of changed it. It sort of took on a different thing. And I remember when she saw the first screening, she said, "Okay, my office now." And we walked through some back entrance to her office from the screening room. And she said, "That's not the movie I bought." But she had tears in her eyes. She says, "That is not what I expected. That was way better." And where did that heart come from? I said, "Well, yeah, that's what we were talking about when we threw the original script out, because I had a different idea of the kind of story that I wanted it to be." Originally, it was a lot more about Tommy and the Rob Lowe character as stepbrothers, and Richard was involved, but it was a whole different story. And so I thought there was an opportunity here for it to be more about two guys who didn't get along at work having to work together to save this company and eventually the town. But also, it was a chance to tell a story about a father and son, because Chris had a very close relationship to his father, and I thought that was very important. So the whole death and doing all of this in the memory of his father, and we threw it out, and it caused absolute havoc, because then all this messing around, trying to figure out what the story was, we had lost our opportunity to shoot it in between the SNL seasons, and now we were going to infringe upon the SNL season and have to shoot it simultaneously, which was going to be really hard for the actors, Dave and Chris, and it was going to have our $12 million budget go up to 15, because you're not shooting 5-day weeks. We only got them maybe 3 days a week, and the other 2 days they were flying back to New York to do SNL. So that really made it difficult.
I have so many things I want to bring up, but I'm curious. So I watched it in 4K, and it looked amazing. What was it like for you tonight watching it in 4K with everyone?
Well, what was cool is, like, a couple months ago, Paramount said, "Hey, would you like to come and do another color timing of the movie?" I said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, we're going to do it in 4K. And I forgot to tell Bill, because I didn't realize, what it was like, "Hey, why don't you have me come too?" But I called him later and I said, "Dude, I'm still working on this movie 30 years later. It won't stop." But what happened was I started to see certain things, some of which were fixed, like, because it's now sharper than the original 35, I started to see, like, cables, like when the prehistoric forest, the car is pulled to a stop. And I'm like, "Ooh, see that?" And I saw a few other things here and there. So it revealed some things, but it also gave me a chance to go back, and there were a couple little things, which I won't bore you with, that I got to go and fix that have bugged me for 30 years.
But you really need to say what one of them was.
It's a little piece of hair was in front of David's forehead, like a stray hair. And I kept wanting to go, and finally I said, "Guys, could you please paint that loose strand of hair out?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." I'm like, "Thank you." It's dumb, but it meant something.
Have you told David that you did this?
Absolutely not. Please don't repeat that.
What is it like when, doing comedy on set versus the script? Like, I'm so curious, as someone who's directed so much comedy, what is it like when you are directing comedians like this and finding new things on set versus what you have scripted? Because the biggest challenge is time, and you only have so much time to do stuff. Hopefully I'm making some sense with what I'm bringing up.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing here is that Chris and Dave were mostly live performers. They hadn't done a lot of movies. They hadn't done any movie as leads. And so I think in the beginning, there was a lot of boredom. Like I was saying earlier, that they were having to do multiple takes with multiple angles, and I think a little frustration towards me, because they were blaming me for the process of movie making. I'm like, dude, this is just how it goes. But because we didn't have any, a completed screenplay, I would just scavenge and try to find material in their banter. And, one famous story is, Chris came out of the wardrobe trailer for his wardrobe test, and he had the, now iconic brown tweed sport coat on, and he said, hey, David, does this suit make me look fat? And David said, no, your face does. And I said, that's going in. Fat guy in a little coat was, a bit that Farley did at the SNL office, but it was only spoken. Because of the boredom factor, here's, a little known story, although now it's, I guess more people know about it. But we were shooting the scene, fat guy in a little coat, and I shot Chris's side first. Okay, great. And then I turned around on David and was focusing on him. We only had one camera, we were low budget. And then the next day, Bill Kerr calls me and says, oh my God, that was hilarious. I said, cool, great. He goes, no, the singing part off camera. I said, what are you talking about? Well, when Farley was off camera doing Spade's, when you were shooting Spade, he started to sing Fat Guy in a Little Coat. You got to go back and reshoot that. You got to get that on camera. So thank Bill Kerr for that.
One of the things that you mentioned, that they were filming SNL while you were filming this, so you could only film for 3 days. And I could be wrong, but it does sound like you didn't have a completed script. So was it almost beneficial that you were only shooting 3 days, because when they would go back to SNL, you could work on the script?
100%. That's exactly. It was a blessing and a curse. Going into the SNL season, we didn't get. It pissed those guys off because it was so exhausting. But for me, it was a chance for me and Fred Wolf, who then became the head writer after the Turners left because they sold another show somewhere else. Fred and I would jam, and there were times when, for example, it would go down to the wire. The day of hosing him off after cow tipping, we were setting up the shot during the day, towards the end of the day, because it was a night shoot. And I was looking at this and saying, this is not popping. Something's wrong. And so I called Fred. And Lauren had sort of allowed him to be, a utility player and not do as much SNL while we were shooting. And I said, Fred, this scene's kind of dead. And he goes, well, describe the shot. And I said, well, it's going to be nighttime, so, Rob's going to be spraying him with water, and it'll be backlit, so splashing. He goes, flash dance. I'm like, got it, thank you. That's all I needed to hear. And I went up to Chris and I said, okay, Chris, when the water hits you, do your best Jennifer Beal. And but that's how we were, coming up with stuff just every day on the fly.
It's so crazy because 9 out of 10 times this might not work.
Correct.
Yeah, except you had Chris Farley.
Actually, I have to tell you, Farley's amazing. But if you don't have Spade, you don't get the same Farley, because Spade is really like the comedy engine. He would pitch stuff, at Farley, and Farley would whack it out of the park. You needed that pitch, though.
100%. I am not discounting Spade's involvement.
No, he's. I'm saying this also because I'm going on his podcast tomorrow. So he was fantastic.
Why Toronto?
Money.
Was there a tax break even back then?
Yeah, it was cheaper. And the cool thing is, the city of Sandusky, the Chamber of Commerce called me 5 years ago for the 25th. And they wanted to do a big celebration in Sandusky, for the movie. And it got shut down because of the pandemic. So now it's happening in August. Now it's going to be the 30th, and it's a 3-day festival. And I said, it's like a car show, and and the Tommy Boy car will be there, and a beer festival and screening and everything. And I said to these guys, this is fantastic, but you do know we didn't shoot one frame in Sandusky. We shot it in Toronto. They said, we don't care. There's 2 things in Ohio that we have near us: Cedar Point and Tommy Boy. You guys put us on the fucking map.
Speaking of the Tommy Boy car, you now own one of them. Talk a little bit about the cars themselves and the fact that no one really thought to save one. Let's get into this.
So there were 4 cars. And normally when you do anything with stunts, you need 2. Because one may break down or something may go wrong. Then we needed one pristine one, which was only going to be in the first act, because there's stages of destruction throughout. And then as I found out when we were planning the deer sequence, we had to donate one of the cars, the fourth car, to the deer wrangler, because for the deer sequence, I had all these storyboards, of how the destruction was going to go. And when I met the animal wrangler, he looked through them all, just paging through, and said, nope, nope, nope. Finally, the last page, deer on top of the car, jumps off. He goes, that one we can do. I said, and what'll it take to do one shot? Well, I need a car for the entire shoot. It's going to take weeks to get this. I'm going to put it in the middle of my field. I'm going to put your cameras and lights in bushes, put a ramp on the back of the car so that whenever it wants, the deer can walk up the ramp, because you can't train a deer. The deer will walk up the ramp, eat the food that we'll put in there. It'll eat there, then piss and shit. And then one night when it's eating and hopefully not pissing and shitting in the shot, we're going to turn on the lights in the camera. That'll scare him. He'll jump off the car and run away. That was one of the cars. So afterwards, they asked me, do you want to buy any of these cars? Now, at the time, I also thought we hadn't finished the movie yet. We hadn't started editing, the completed movie. And I said, hell no. No, this movie is going to bomb. I don't want any memory of it. Keep the cars. Well, it was a different history that happened. And then suddenly I started a few years later calling, saying, anyone know where those cars went? Nope. Well, it wasn't until 5 years ago, I'm back in Toronto for the first time since the movie, making a movie called My Spy with Dave Bautista. And 12 people on the crew had worked on Tommy Boy 24 years earlier, including the deer wrangler and the transpo coordinator. And I said, any idea where their car went? No. So then one day I get a call from Bill Kerr, who says, dude, the car has been found. One of the cars was a barn find. It's at the Barrett-Jackson auction in Florida. You got a bid on it? And I said, this is going to be expensive. I'm going to call Spade. I'm going to offer it to him first. I just felt like that was the right thing to do. So Spade, he bid on it, and he got it. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And he shipped it out to his house. He goes, I'm not going to do anything to it. It's just a good conversation piece. People could just look at it as rusty and, destroyed as it is. Okay, cool. 2 years later, I'm filming a show called Heels in Atlanta. And he calls me and he said, you saw Heels? Oh, cool. And he calls me and said, fuck, I fucked up. And I said, what? He goes, well, Barrett-Jackson called me and I have this other Chevelle SS that is going to go. Michael Strahan wants it and ended up selling for some crazy amount. And they asked me if I wanted to flip the GTX, the Tommy Boy car. And I said, yes, I should have just sold it to you. And I said, okay. And he said, well, you should bid on it, Pete. It's now at the Scottsdale Barrett-Jackson auction. So I bid on it, and I got it. And literally, the title says I bought the car from David Spade. But I decided to restore it. So it's been 2.5 years. It might be done in 2 months. And we're going to take it to Sandusky.
I have to ask, what does it cost to restore a car like this?
I am not answering that question.
Is it because your wife is in the audience?
Oh, she knows. That's why I'm not going to bring it up again. It's one more reminder. It's not going well, thanks. Shh.
I'm just going to say I'm glad you're doing it, though.
Oh, thank you.
Let's talk about the deer, though. And at what point of the shoot did you say to yourself, why the F did I choose a deer?
Well, I'll tell you, there was a time when Fred Wolf, the writer, and Lorne Michaels came out from New York because they said, Pete, Fred's got a good idea. He wants to pitch it to you. And so we went to the Ivy on Robertson, and he pitched me the story and it was based on a true call, a 911 call. Some guy had hit a deer, and he was calling 911 from a payphone while the deer was biting him. And you hear the 911 operator is trying so hard not to laugh hysterically while this deer was attacking this guy as he's screaming, "I got a motherfucking deer biting my motherfucking neck." And Fred said, and we're gonna hit the deer and it's gonna wake up and all this. And I didn't get it. I will admit, I was going, that's mean. We're gonna lose half the audience. And then Lauren just said, "Pete, it's gonna work. It's gonna be good." And I got on board, but then, planning it, like I said, first of all, can't train a deer. Okay, so I got one shot. How did we do the rest, right? So I go into the special effects office, and I said, "Do we have any money to, build an animatronic deer?" "Sure we do." Yeah, until, weeks later, I go in and I see the worst robot, and I said, "Oh, that's horrible. That's not going to work." The animatronic deer, I think, has one shot in the movie. The legs of the deer going across the road, that was a goat, and it was a female, so it had a full udder full of milk, and so we had to duct tape it up so you could just. Okay, and then how do we shoot the destruction? Well, we had nothing left except a deer skin and some antlers, and so it was a grip who just got under it and just, and that's how we put that together.
It's so funny because you don't think about 30 years ago when you were making this, no internet, the movie has payphones in it. What are those? No CGI. It's just, it's pretty crazy how far technology has come in those 30 years.
Yeah, you said it. But I one little thing, towards the end, how the boat, it bonks him on the head, beautiful moment, and then it turns and goes away. Well, even in those days, it was a pretty ingenious thing that, our special effects department did. They put a cable on the boat. They put a pulley in the middle of the lake, and that cable ran to that pulley, and then the cable ran to the side, and a truck, it was attached to the hitch of the truck, and it drove away, and this Rube Goldbergian thing, made this little 10-foot sailboat do its thing. That was pretty cool, and that was so low tech back then.
That's how you made movies back then.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about the editing process. Anyone who's come to these screenings knows that's what I talk about or I get into. So when you had a cut you were happy with, what was it like in terms of a friends and family screening or test screening? Do you remember? Mm-hmm. And did you know at that moment, oh wait, this is pretty funny?
You don't know. This is only my second movie, and you get it to a point, you and the editor, where you get it as tight as you think, and then you just don't know anymore until you put it in front of an audience, right? And so what I learned from the Zucker brothers, who learned this from the Marx brothers, who would take their material and perform it in dinner theater before they took it to the stage to work out the best material and know already what works and what doesn't. But what then David took from that is his version of testing was, let's record the audience so we can hear the laughter. So if I say, "Oh, that got a pretty good laugh," and then Bill says, "No, I got a titter, barely," we just go to the tape so we wouldn't have to argue. But I remember I had just been given a gift, a Sony Handycam for Christmas or something, and it had night vision. And I said, "Ooh, I have an idea. Let's put it right up here, back on the crowd, and so we don't just have audio, we can see the crowd when they're, bored, checking their watch, yawning, fidgeting, all that." It was the first movie ever to use night vision. Now it is an industry standard.
So what was it like watching the crowd? What did you learn from those early screenings? And because I know the film has deleted scenes and obviously you had multiple takes on certain stuff. So what was it like, seeing what the crowd was doing and then figuring out what take you wanted to use?
Well, we use it, I'm a nerd, when it comes to the testing process. I love the process. Bill and I have done a bunch of stuff together, and we love to just geek out on every aspect of every card that someone writes something, something that is either offensive or they didn't understand, and then we've got now this, fantastic tool of night vision. And so we had all these tools to help us, tighten and eliminate certain things and, explain with, if we needed to, with ADR, extra dialogue on the back of someone's head. And, we got it to the point where it is. Although, Bill, there's still some things I'd like to tighten up. Yeah, we'll talk.
The 4K, I didn't watch the extras, but the 4K has a lot of deleted scenes, alt takes, a commentary by you, a whole bunch of things. What are you most excited for people to see on the 4K release? That is there anything new on it that hasn't been out previously?
Well, the 4K, I think this one is primarily the visual of the quality of the movie. This is the best that it's ever been. We at the 20th, we had a screening at Tarantino's theater, the New Beverly, and he had the most spectacular 35 millimeter print. It was better than the studio gave USC when I was doing, a screening down there. It was spectacular, but this looks even better than that. And so I think that's the biggest thing that you're going to see as a difference on this DVD.
What was it actually like in terms of like the shooting schedule? You mentioned you had a 12 million, then it went to like 15. How much time did you actually have to make this?
I think because of only shooting 3 days a week, it ended up taking longer. I think it was in the 40s of days, something like that.
Was that actual shooting days?
Shooting days, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there were occasional things that we'd had to do if I didn't have Chris. I would shoot, over a double, certain long shots from driving were doubles. I do remember, because Chris was such a great athlete, he did all of his own stunts. There was nobody who could do stunts better than him, his size. One shot after the funeral when Tommy is walking down the lane with all the beautiful fall colors was a double, and Chris hated it. He said, "That's not how I walk." And so I just learned from that one moment. I said, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's all you, so we're just going to have to wait till you come back, And we just had to sit there. And the studio had no choice. So, they went with it.
One of the scenes in the film that I'm just like fucking blown away by is when he's in the plane bathroom and he has to change. Because it's obviously him doing all this.
Oh, yeah.
So talk a little bit about filming that sequence and what he went through, because he beat himself up.
Well, that's one of the only scenes from the original script, maybe two others, but that was it. We knew, I said, well, I remember my agent saying, "Why did you take this movie?" I said, "Well, there's that airplane bathroom scene. That's pretty funny." And but when you have a set that small, oftentimes you carry it with you. If it's raining, you go, okay, well, bring out the bathroom set. And, if you have a little extra time, bring out the bathroom set. So it was always being trailered around to all of the locations, that stupid bathroom set. And finally, one day, but what that did is that built up all this extra anticipation and expectation, because it was the only funny scene in the original script. Everyone was looking forward to that. We kept procrastinating when, and then finally we set it up and it was here we go. And then, the hard thing is also how do you film something that, the bathroom is almost the size of this table, and so we had a couple of camera portals and, did it from up top, but the rest was Chris, and then, brilliant editing, bringing that all together.
Was that that was all one day?
Oh yeah, that took a couple hours.
It's so crazy, and because there's things hitting him, he's like, I don't know how he did it. I really don't.
Well, we helped key, the little baby, diaper changing table. That was one, and we knew what was going to be destroyed. There was a little extra destruction, on the day, because Chris is Chris, and he's was a big fella, but yeah, 2 hours.
When you think back on the making of this film, now looking back 30 years later, what's like a day or two that you always remember, or is it more just you had a blast making this?
I honestly did not have a blast making this because it was so hard. And, I remember
that's a real honest answer.
Very honest. And, I tried to quit the movie early on, and I was strongly encouraged by the head of the studio to stay at it and not leave if I wanted to keep my home. No joke. And so I was pretty miserable. I would go into Bill's edit room and I would cry because my daughters were, my son wasn't born yet. My daughters were 3 and 1. And when they did visit, they'd grown. And I just felt like, oh my God, I'm missing out on life. But there was one moment when we were working on the script, and I think we had just written the Carpenters scene, which was an idea from Spade. And I got in the car with Chris because we went to go meet Brian Dennehy for dinner to talk him into doing this. And this was a time, you have to remember, when SNL was, not doing well. The ratings were in the toilet, and they had arguably one of the best casts in history. It wasn't just Farley and Spade, it was Sandler and Chris Rock and Mike Myers and others. But the ratings were not good, and so here was this movie that was going out with original characters. It wasn't based on a Conehead sketch or a Wayne's World sketch. It was original. And Chris looked at me in the car and he said, "Pete, everyone expects us to fail. Our only victory will be a successful movie." And I looked at him and I just realized, all right, we're in this together. That was sort of his Band of Brothers moment. And so I'll never forget that.
One of the things in this movie that you can never repeat again is when they dress up as flight attendants and just manage to get on.
Yes, I know the word. You cannot say that. I cringe now hearing it. So.
Yeah, it's crazy because when I rewatched it, I was like, "Oh, like
yes,
people who weren't around before 9/11. You could go to the airport and go to the gate, and like there were things you just could do that 9/11.
Oh, that part. I was talking about the R word, but
that
yes.
too. Yeah.
I don't think. Yeah, even back then, I don't think you could just mug a flight attendant, steal their clothes, and just walk on the plane. But yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No, it's just it's again, it captures a time and place that even though it's 30 years, it's just so much has changed.
Yeah.
And also just talk a little bit about the way movie making has changed. I mean, this is all shot on film. And another thing is you had this and I forgot how good the orchestra is for this. Like the soundtrack is not what I expected.
Yeah. Well, like I said, originally, budgetarily, Sherry Lansing said, you've got a nickel for a garage band. And then I went out and scored it with, Sean, is that James Newton Howard? No, but what we temped with from Dave. James Newton Howard. And so we temped with James Newton Howard. And then, the movie tested well. And Sherry said, okay, you get an orchestra. And so we went out. And that's the good news. The bad news is David Newman had 3 weeks to put it together. And so we said, just come as close to the temp as possible. And there were times when Bill and I, in the scoring sessions, would do this symbol to each other, which was handcuffs being put on us because we were too close to the original without, we're going to get arrested. This is like ripping off James Newton Howard. But we did it in a way that, it was legal. But I do remember this. I went in for a meeting a couple years later in Ivan Reitman's office. The first thing he said to me as I walked in is, "Nice score." Yeah. Yeah. Ivan's son, ladies and gentlemen.
Is it true that Rob Lowe only did the movie because he was friends with Chris Farley?
I don't really know why Rob did the movie. He didn't put his name on it. Like, I've been doing press this past week because of the 30th, and people ask this all the time. Why did he not have his name on the movie? I think because he thought it might have sucked, and you wanted to distance. He was very successful in Wayne's World, and when he signed on, there was probably just half a script, which is what we started with, and he was going, "Oh boy, this is going to be fun." I think that's why. I don't really know.
There's another scene in the film that I really like, and I want to know how you filmed it, is when Chris is playing with the model car, trying to sell brake pads, and then he lights it on fire. And so talk a little bit about filming that sequence.
That I give credit to Brad Isaacs, who came in, and did a little bit of work on the script. That one seems to have lived on in infamy. That poor actor across, I don't remember what his name was, who was reacting to it. He did such an amazing job. His reactions were fantastic. There was supposed to be some destruction in it, and the "oh my God" was a bit that Farley had done, and I said, well, we got to find a place for that. It was a much more his joke, I cannot even repeat it here, how graphic it was to get to the cop saying, "Oh my God." But ours was the PG version of it. Anyway, he said, "Just can you make this car flammable? I want to light it on fire." I'm like, "Okay." "And how many cars do you have? Because how many takes do I get to destroy these things?" "Not a lot. I think we have 2. He goes, "Okay." And then the rest is him.
Yeah, it's when Chris Farley and David Spade are driving and they're crying, I read that Chris couldn't cry, so he poked himself in the eye to get himself to cry.
That was at the end of the movie when it was, and not the end, the earlier boat scene with Julie Warner. He poked himself in the eye there. The Carpenters, we put some, glycerin on his cheeks. But yeah, he would do that, and he would.
What is that like, actually?
Poking yourself in the eye?
I mean, is it right before you're going to start filming? He just pokes himself and just. Do you know what I mean?
He was an unusual cat, but he was very athletic, and there were times because he was clean and sober during this movie, and I worked with him earlier when he wasn't, and so the fact that he replaced the other substances with caffeine was fine. But he was very amped up. And so when you're amped up, it's sort of the opposite of the emotion when you're crying, when you need to kind of calm down and really feel something. He was so, jittery and awake that I think he needed to, feel like he needed to do that. But there were other times, like in the beginning of the movie, when he was at college and he couldn't get something right about, D+, that I said, I treated him kind of like an athlete. And I said, "Chris, go run around the courtyard twice, come back. And then, Chris, drop and give me 20. And he loved it because he sort of treated me like a coach. Once I got him to sort of calm down and breathe deeply, and then he could perform. And it's kind of the way we just worked it.
And again, pardon me for not knowing this, but when it came out, how did it do at the box office? It
was #1 opening weekend with about 8 million. It only did about 31 all in. It was not released overseas, but that's not where it made its money. For the 10th anniversary, they flew crews all over the country to interview the whole cast. They did this whole big promotion, bobblehead dolls, maps, all these things. And I said to Paramount, "Wow, you guys are doing a lot for this. What's the big deal?" And they said, "Well, this is a top 10 seller for us." I said, I don't understand what that means. This is 10 years later. Top 10 what, this year? He goes, "No, top 10 all time. Paramount home video." It's like, "Well, you mean with Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Godfather top 10? Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah.
It's so funny because when you think about the making of this film and everything that went on, and it ended up being so popular. It's an amazing achievement.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. For people that wanted to know, or want to know what Chris Farley was like, you've done an amazing job tonight, pulling back the curtain. But is there any other stories you want to share or anything else you want people to know?
Well, I was just asked this past week something which made me think. He wrote on my poster, "Pete, come back to me." And I just want him to know, I will.
I'm just going to say that for everyone, the 4K version of Tommy Boy is now available for sale. And so in case you enjoyed it and want to own it. And I really want to say a huge thank you to Paramount for teaming up with us to let us screen this in a movie theater.
Yes, thank you very much.
Seriously, thank you. Paramount people are right there. Thank you. And to all of you here tonight, thank you for coming out on a school night. Thank you to Pete Segal for doing this with us. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you.